So we're going to look at something different tonight, something a bit more philosophical. This is a book called Sefer Hachinuch, which means literally the book of education, and it's a book that was written in the 13th century by an unknown author, an anonymous author, and he's written this book addressed to his son who's about to have his bar mitzvah. And in this book, what he's trying to do is present the 613 commandments and their reasons to his son who's about to take on the yoke of bar mitzvah. Exactly who wrote it, it's not known. There's a theory that it was written by a rabbi named Rabbi Aaron Halevi from Barcelona. There were at least two Rabbi Aaron Halevis of Barcelona. There's a different one who, and they're not sure which one it was. It could have been somebody else. It's an anonymous book. We don't actually know who wrote it. But it's a fascinating work where it goes actually through systematically all 613 commandments and explains their reasons in a way for a 13-year-old kid. But it's a classic. But what we're going to look at is not the 613 commandments, but his introduction. Because the way he writes his introduction to the book is he makes it a bit like a dialogue between the non-believer and the believer. And in setting out the basics of Jewish philosophy and Jewish belief, he responds to the typical questions that people ask who are skeptics when it comes to belief, and he tries to answer them in a clear and quite a logical way. And even though this is written over 800 years ago, but it's pretty spot on as far as the way people think and good responses to these questions. So let's have a look. It says the Hakdamas Rabbeinu Mechavazal, which just means the introduction of the author. We don't know who he is, so we can't even say the name, but whoever the author was, this is his introduction to his work. So let's have a look. He begins with the following words. Ha'emes habar b'min hanoshi. The truth that is clear amongst human beings is is what most people in the world have agreed upon. Meaning, how do we measure truth in this world? Is if most people accept something, so then that's already called truth. Now, everyone agrees that we can believe eyewitness testimony from a person. And the more witnesses there are to an event, the more confirmed the event will be in the ears of the hearer. Right? So he's just establishing that as far as how we establish truth in this world, how do we know the truth? We're human beings. We don't know everything. We base our understanding of truth, of fact, of reality, on testimony. If somebody said they saw it, so seeing is not just believing, seeing is knowing. Seeing means that something happened. And so if you come and tell me you saw something, I believe you, depending on how much I trust you. If you come and another guy comes and tells me the same story, so it's starting to get more established. Two opinions, two people say the same thing. If 100 people come and tell me a story, so then it's even more established, it's more believable that the thing is fact, it's real, it's true. Because if you saw it happen, you saw it with your own eyes, and I hear it from not just you, but many other people, it's becoming more established and more real. If there are only a few people who have witnessed something, so then an intelligent person will be slightly more doubtful whether it happened as compared to if more people had seen it. So if only 2 or 3 people have seen something, okay, maybe it's true, or maybe they made it up, or maybe they were fooled, or maybe there was a trick, or it may or may not have happened. But once you get 12 people, 24, 100 people, the more and more people seeing something, the more fact it becomes, more reality it becomes. So, where's he getting at with this? We'll see. We're on the 7th line, 8th line. Etzel is the beginning of the line. This idea has become so established, Etzel b'nei Adam, amongst human beings, to the point, this is so accepted, the idea that testimony is acceptable and creates fact, to the point where various nations, in their laws, have established that you can actually execute a person based on testimony. Put someone to death. Not just talking about Torah law here, but many laws around the world, and until recently most countries had the death penalty, and the death penalty would be based on testimony. Somebody would come and say, I'm a witness that I saw this particular thing, and if there was enough testimony, enough witnesses, 2 or 3, it was often enough, and their testimony stood, so then you would actually put them to death. So we're so sure of the fact of something based on testimony, even though I didn't see it, the judge didn't see it, but the witnesses have told me they saw it. We're so convinced of that reality that we'll even put someone to death based on testimony. And not only do we find in non-Jewish law, but even in Jewish law, there's also a thing. Torah also says the same thing, that through eyewitness testimony, you can actually put someone to death. So that's how real testimony is for us. So I didn't see it with my own eyes, but you did. So if I can be convinced of what you're saying, it's as real to me as you, to the point where if I'm the judge, I'll put the person to death based on the testimony. Now, continues. Based on this concept, everyone agrees that we believe our parents. That when our parents have told us their experiences, or our grandparents tell us about their traditions, or this is how they grew up, or this is where they were, so we believe them because we weren't there, but we hear the previous generation about what they experienced and where they came from, and what they did, and where they were, and we accept their testimony. We don't start questioning, or maybe my parents are making up stories. They're telling us what they saw, and we hear what they said. Obviously saying that they tell us what happened in their days, or they tell us what happened in their grandparents' days, what I heard from my parents or from my grandparents, and so on. And certainly, if an event happened that your parents heard about, they heard it from their grandparents, let's say. And not only them, but all of your cousins have also heard it from their grandparents. And not only that, but everyone in the neighborhood heard from their grandparents that something had happened in the community that they all witnessed. The more people that are telling the same story, the more real that is. So a way we can span generations, we can know what happened in the past, is through testimony. And again, the more witnesses we have, the more convincing it is that this story happened in the past. So you might have a family tradition that something happened in your family, and you sometimes wonder, maybe the grandfather was a bit, off the rocker and started telling stories, and is exactly true or not, you're not sure. But if a bunch of people are all telling the same story that happened, different families have this tradition, so then that more establishes something as not just a family legend, but everyone says it really did happen. So therefore, where's he leading us? It should be obvious by now. Al ken kisharatza lekim losses Torah la'am Yisrael nesana lahem le'eni 600,000 anoshim gedolim. Therefore, when God wanted to give the Torah to His people, He gave it in front of 600,000 male adults. Milvad tafaroshim rabim, apart from the children and the women, which would have added to 2.5 million people. In order to have an entire nation as a witness to the event. So what he's explaining here is 2 things. One question that is often asked is that why did God give the Torah at that point in history? He should have given it earlier. He could have given the Torah to Abraham, or to Adam, or to Noah, to at the beginning of time. Why did God give the Torah at this particular time? And one of the answers to that is because if the Torah would have been given to an individual, that an individual says that I received this revelation from God, so our belief in Torah would be based on the testimony of an individual. One person is saying, God spoke to me. So God waited until the Jewish people were a nation, a fully fledged nation of many different types of people, and He gave the Torah at that stage because that is a much more convincing story. He doesn't want there to be doubt in the future generations that people are going to wonder, was the Torah really given? Did it really come from God or not? Maybe somebody just made it up or came up with it themselves. So giving it to an entire nation would avoid that. You can't make that claim because everyone, the entire Jewish people were there, and the entire Jewish people have this tradition. There's no family anywhere in the Jewish world that says, we never heard of this. We don't eat matzah on Pesach because our family never heard of the idea of Pesach. Well, what do you mean? Every Jewish family has the same tradition. That this is where we came from. This is what happened. And every community everywhere in the world, even communities that didn't see each other for 1,000 years, still have the same tradition, the same story. They're all telling the same story, which makes it much more convincing than any other story. Well, every other religion in the world was started by an individual or a small group of individuals who claimed a divine revelation. God spoke to us, or me. So maybe not. But here you have an entire nation saying God spoke to us. You can't make that one up. Yeah? Strong argument? You see any flaws in the argument? Any holes?
There's the idea of mass delusion. And then Lawrence Cohen brings proof, brings an argument against that, but then can refute it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
mass delusion would be a bit unrealistic to say that the 2.5 million people all had the same delusion, right? Particularly when you consider who are these 2.5 million people? They're Jews. And how often do Jews agree on anything? You see, this particular generation went for 40 years in the desert. They didn't agree on anything. They were constantly, they were at the Red Sea, there were 4 parties, four different opinions. Every step of the way they argued and disagreed and factionalized. So if you think about it, it was brilliant for God to give His Torah to all people, to give it to the Jewish people, with all their opinions, and on this they all agree. It's a clever move.
Well, one of the questions I get from some of my friends, someone just could have written that happened and it didn't really happen.
Right.
Post the event.
Right. So the problem with that is, who's going to believe them? If someone's writing that I spoke to God, or my family, my grandfather spoke to God, so then I can take it or leave it. But how can somebody come to you and tell you your grandfather spoke to God, or this is your family tradition? How can somebody come to you and give it to you? You understand? For somebody to make up a philosophy and say God spoke to me, anyone can do that. And if they're convincing enough, they might have millions of followers. But that doesn't make it truth. Whereas to convince millions of people that they have a tradition, at what point in history could you do that? Imagine somebody coming today and telling you that in your family, there's a family tradition that your family was in this place or did this thing or had this experience. You'll say, who are you telling me? So why didn't my father or my grandfather tell me this? And so, let's say I could convince you. But how many people could I convince already that you were there? So, it doesn't really make sense to say that at any point this was introduced to an entire nation, that this was your tradition. And that's the power of mass revelation over an individual revelation. That's what makes it so convincing.
What would be the argument against that mass revelation that you would think of?
I can make an argument again. The only way we know about the argument is that about mass revelations to the Torah. So if you could find a place where the tradition handed out from generation to generation has been even stopped for slightly or weakened, so then you can say that your proof that of mass revelation is just based on a single document which you have no proof for. I'm saying like the only proof is based on the fact that lots of people independently of the Torah had that experience as well.
Well, no, because you still have to say, if that individual document, how did that convince everyone that this is yours and you didn't know about it? It doesn't make sense that at some point you could introduce this document and tell people that this is yours, and in the document it says that your grandparents received this. But I'm telling you this and your grandparents didn't tell you this. How many people could you convince of such a thing?
It wasn't even...
Unless you have a whole thing of converts that come, you only have like 1 or 2 religious Jews left and you have everyone else being converts. It's not just that being the devil's advocate.
Here's the theory of that. A whole bunch of converts in Turkey. You heard about it?
There was an empire, the Khazar Empire, that converted to Judaism. Right, but that wasn't the majority of the Jewish people. That was people who joined the Jew. But what were they joining? They were joining a religion, a nation that existed that had this tradition. So of course, a convert understands that this is not my tradition. I'm joining it. But what am I joining? I'm joining. So who converted these people? If there are only 2 Jews left, you don't have a base then, you can't convert anybody. There has to be a community, there has to be something you're joining.
So I mean, that's what I feel like the mass revelation thing depends a lot on the smicha of the Masorah. And without the strong Masorah, you don't have anything. You don't have the mass revelation.
But without the strong Masorah, you couldn't introduce a mass revelation. That's the thing. If there was not an unbroken chain of tradition that this is what happened, so then So his point here, what he's trying to introduce here, and remember he's writing this to his son as a bar mitzvah boy, as an introduction to Torah, is that our first step in accepting the Torah is that that we don't have to have faith. It's not a blind faith thing. You just have to accept that the Torah was given by God. It's not a blind faith thing. It makes a lot of sense. It's based on testimony. So just like a court will execute a person based on testimony, and there it's a testimony of an individual or 2 individuals. So here you have a testimony of an entire nation that is unbroken, that we're basing our faith on testimony, on a fact. So it's a very strong argument, and it's a unique one. And it shouldn't be underestimated how powerful that argument is, that we're not basing it purely on faith. So that's why God chose to give the Torah to an entire nation. So,
what were the 2 reasons? One, because...
Well, it answers 2 questions. Why God didn't give the Torah earlier?
Yeah, because...
Because then there'd be an individual.
Yeah, and then it can be...
So therefore, giving it to an entire nation makes it establish it, because he wants it to be believed. Okay, so he continues now. The Sefer Hachinuch continues with another point here. Gam. The word gam is the last word on the line, about 2/3 down the page. Gam, the word line ends with gam. Gam l'mantia edus Yosef Chazaka. In order to further strengthen this testimony, Yosef Chazaka and Emana should be more strong and more believable. Zachu kulam l'mailis hanavua. The entire people experienced prophecy at Mount Sinai. That they weren't just there watching what was happening with their physical eyes, but they were actually experiencing a prophecy as well. Because when you see something through prophecy, you cannot possibly doubt it. When you see it, when somebody else has a prophecy, you could doubt their prophecy. When you have a prophecy, it's seeing it with your own spiritual eyes, and you can have no doubt. So what was the prophecy that the entire Jewish people experienced at Mount Sinai? Hashem says to Moshe the following: that the people should hear when I speak to you, and so therefore they will also believe in you forever. What does that mean? That they, their children and the children's children will believe in you and your prophecy forever. Because they will be able to see with their own eyes that God spoke to a human being and he survived it. Meaning, we'll keep going. V'shekol nevuascha emes, after the brackets there. Shekol nevuascha emes, v'lu le'shazachel le'nevuah b'chol ha'oises she'asa Moshe le'ne parei le'em ha'ila baldin la'chlok le'em. So he says like this, that the entire Jewish people experienced a prophecy. They saw Moses and God speaking to each other, and they overheard the conversation. So it wasn't just that they saw Moses go up the mountain and disappear, but they actually overheard the conversation of God speaking to Moses. They actually experienced that. And it wasn't just one person or a few people, everyone experienced the same thing. So if I thought I heard God speaking one morning, so like, I might wonder, did I really hear that? But when I speak to God next, I say, did you hear that? Yeah, did you? And everyone heard it, everyone heard the same thing, that Moses speaking to God. So then there can be no doubt. It's total clarity that this is what happened. Now, why was this necessary? If you think about it, could it be possible for those people who experienced the Mount Sinai revelation, could they possibly doubt? They're the ones who just saw the 10 plagues in Egypt. They saw Moses, everything he did. Would they doubt Moses' leadership? Moses' prophecy, that he's being true? The answer is yes. They would.
They did.
And we see they did. How? V'lu le'shazachel le'nevuah. Well, on the 8th last line from the bottom, at the beginning. V'lu le'shazachel le'nevuah b'chol ha'oises she'asa Moshe le'ne parei le'neim ha'yel baldin la'chlok le'mer. If they would not have received this prophecy, so as far as all the miracles that Moses did to Pharaoh, the 10 plagues, excuse me, you could still have an argument against that. You could come up with a claim against believing in Moses based on the miracles of the plagues. Who knows, maybe all of those plagues were done through magic. Maybe he was connected to some black magic power, and that's what made him able to do all these amazing plagues. Or maybe he knew names of angels, and by utilizing the names of these angels, he was able to manipulate spiritual energies and cause miracles to happen. Who says it's coming from God? Maybe it was some other spiritual source. Because we know that the Torah accepts the idea that there are spiritual powers that are not godly. Doesn't mean that there's nothing separate from God, but they're not holy. There are unholy powers that God has created, and there's a choice. You can follow holiness or unholiness. Black magic is prohibited in the Torah, not because it doesn't exist. It does exist. It's just wrong. It's something you shouldn't play with. You shouldn't get involved with it.
Why does it say B'kach Shemes HaMalachim? Surely if you use Shemes HaMalachim, it wouldn't be a problem, because that's part of Hashem.
Not necessarily. Because if you by manipulating angelic power, that is also a type of black magic. That's what most black magic is taking true angelic power and
what is shading? Something different.
Shading means more negative energy, like black, like the darker side of the force. Whereas malachim, even holy angels, but if you're utilizing their names, that itself is a form of magic. That
using holiness without it being holy.
Yeah, or without going to God.
It would have been. It's okay in terms of if you would have just been redeeming the people, that's probably would be acceptable, but it's not enough to replace a religion.
Yeah, or it could be. It's probably also forbidden to do such a thing.
Right.
To actually tamper with the angelic forces, A lot of the New Age spirituality is into like channeling angels and all that type of stuff. That would come under this category. That they're not evil angels; they're good angels. But that's not where we go to. We go to God. We don't go to the angels and their powers. So the fact that somebody does miracles, that itself proves nothing. It doesn't prove any divine force. It could be some evil force, angelic force. Even if the real miracle is happening, something supernatural is happening, doesn't mean it's holy. So the fact that Moses was able to do these miracles, sticks into snakes and snakes into sticks, that doesn't prove anything yet. It could be black magic. Va'af, the fourth last line. Va'af al pi shechachmei Mitzrayim v'chol chartomei shayu b'kiyim b'chachmas hashedim b'kishuv yoz b'kol shara olam. Now, even though you might say, hang on a minute, how could you say that Moses was using black magic? We know that the Pharaoh's magicians were the masters of black magic. They knew better than anybody else how to play tricks and do these manipulations of spiritual forces. They admitted to Moses, and what did they say to Pharaoh? Top of the next column. That he's doing it with God's power. Like, remember it says that it's the finger of God. We mentioned it in the Haggadah and Pesach. That even the magicians of Pharaoh said, this is the finger of God. We can't imitate his magic. That is coming from God directly. So how could anyone have doubt that Moses was representing God in his miracles and using magic when the greatest magicians, the greatest black magicians of the time and sorcerers, Pharaoh's sorcerers, they admitted that it was God's hand. So what, the Jewish people could possibly deny that it was God behind Moses? The answer is yes. We could. Pharaoh's sorcerers couldn't come up with anything, but we could. We could come up with an accusation against Moses and say, but yes, somebody who wants to be stubborn can say that Moses was just smarter than them. He was a better magician than them.
You mean he was Jewish?
That's right. And also we're Jewish.
Well,
so the non-Jewish sorcerers of Pharaoh have to admit, that it's the finger of God. Whereas we, stubborn Jews, could say, who says it's the finger of God? Moses was a better magician than them.
It's interesting. Yeah, Jews are either by nature believers or skeptics. It's like,
Yeah, probably both. Probably usually we're both. It says that they're a stubborn people, a stiff-necked people. Like which again, that's why we were chosen, because if they believe it, then it's got to be true. So, we turn the sound off then.
building like a cubby house.
Sounds like he's hitchhiking. So therefore, just having miracles is not enough. Because any miracle you could question. And it says this, in the Torah it says this, that to believe a prophet is a prophet, you have to ask them for a sign. They have to do some sign that they're a prophet. And the way they do a sign is by predicting something will happen and it does happen, or making some miraculous thing. They have to do something supernatural to prove they're a prophet. However, if they then contradict anything from Moses' Torah, after saying I'm a prophet, they then say, and by the way, we don't have to keep Shabbos anymore, or you don't have to keep kosher, whatever it is, and contradict anything from the Torah, then they're a false prophet, the Torah says. And the fact that they did a miracle, they made some sign, okay, God is testing you to see if you're going to be faithful or not. Why? So it's explained because Moses' prophecy was not one based on miracles. It's based on testimony. We saw it. We saw that God spoke to Moses. And so therefore no one can contradict his prophecy, even if they do miracles, because miracles doesn't trump eyewitness testimony. So therefore it wasn't the miracles of Moses that made us believe him, it was the fact that we saw him speak to God.
When we saw him speak to God, was that after he spoke to us and we said, you take the rest, or after that?
It seems to be after
he spoke.
We heard God's voice, then Moses went up and we heard him speaking on the mountain. So therefore, Aval Achrei HaNavuah, the fourth line, Achrei HaNavuah, but after we, through prophecy, actually heard God speak to Moses, Lo nisha lehem shum tzad pikpuk inyan, it's not possible to have any doubt after that. Yodu beveru ki kol hamaisim nasu b'mitzvahs adon ha'olam, and from there we knew that everything that happened, including what happened in Egypt, all of that was done by God's command, u'miyoda higia aleihem hakol, and everything happened through him. There was no possible doubt after that. So that generation, who saw this and knew it with true knowledge, a knowledge that no human could have any clearer. It's not possible to know something any stronger or clearer than that. They told their children, this is what we saw. That the entire Torah, from Bereshis, the beginning, till the Eini Kol Yisrael, the last words of the Torah, all of this we received it from Moses ourselves. That's what they told their children. And there's no doubt about it, there's no question about it, there's no debate. We all agree on this. And those children told their children, this is what our parents experienced, and that's what they heard. And their children, to their children, all the way down to us, that we've received this tradition. So So it comes out that our Torah is true based on the testimony of 600,000 witnesses, which that number, 600,000, is the number that's inclusive of all opinions. That there's a blessing that you're supposed to make. If you ever see 600,000 people at once, there's a blessing you make, Chacham Arazim, that God who knows the secrets of all mankind. Because if you have 600,000, that's the gamut. There are only 600,000 ways of looking at things. You can't get more than that. And so that's why that number is specific. So if you had 600,000 people, each one had a different way of looking at things, but this they all agreed upon. And that's not even including the children and the women as well, so it would be much more than 600,000, but just the number 600,000 is significant because of that. So that's what we base our testimony on. So that's a principle number one in our faith, is that our faith is based on this eyewitness testimony.